In the days of Judges, that's how the book of Ruth begins. In the days of Judges, but in other words, during the time of the tribal period, where the religious and secular power were not centralized yet, and the Israelites were at the mercy of all sorts of oppressing nations, there was a great famine in Judah. Elimelech and his wife Naomi and their sons Mahlon and Chilion decided to migrate from the barren hills of Bethlehem to Moab. How many of you have moved within the United States in the hopes of a better life for your family? I would bet that there are even people here that are military that have moved from one country to another in order to serve. This church has had a shift of over 58 different pastors in 175 years. United Methodist pastors are itinerant, which means that we are willing to go wherever the bishop has decided that we can serve a congregation well with God's help. And every time we move, at least every time I move, I head off with that hope of serving others well in a good location. I am this congregation's 158th pastor. And so many of us can connect to that hope that Elimelech and Naomi felt as they headed off to Moab. That famine was worse than any economic downturn or recession or even government layoff. It was the real threat of starvation that forced them to move east. And as they left the land of Judah for the Middle East country of Moab, they didn't encounter any border crossing or wall, but they did have to travel over miles of mountainous roads and around the Dead Sea in order to become strangers in even a stranger land. Moab was lush, and the family thrived for a while. The sons married Moabite women, Orpah and Ruth. But after 10 years of living in Moab, all the men tragically were dead, leaving Naomi, Orpah, and Ruth widowed. Now, many of you have gone through this season of life, and you can feel the grief, you can feel the heaviness, the sadness, the lethargy that comes with that kind of grief. But they had not only the grief to endure. In our culture, women have the equality to work or own land or just go to the store and buy whatever they need. So it is hard for us to imagine the danger that enshrouded them. Almost nothing was worse than being a widow in the ancient world. Without the protection of a male relative, they were at risk for deep poverty and gnawing hunger and physical harm. Eventually, Naomi learned that the famine in Judah was over and that God had blessed the land with food again. So the three of them, the three widows, began to journey back to Judah. But after just a few short while of walking and thinking and worrying, Naomi told her daughter-in-laws, who were under no obligation to care for her or go with her, to return to their family homes. Go to your mothers, where you will have a better chance of remarrying, she told them. Remember, at that time, marriage was practically the only respectable way that a woman could have economic and social security. But the young women resisted. And Naomi persisted in telling them again and again. So with misty eyes, Oprah desisted. But Ruth insisted. Please don't tell me to leave and go home. I will go where you will go. I will live where you will live. My people will be your people. Your God will be my God. I will die where you die and be buried beside you. May the Lord punish me if we are ever separated, even by death." Wow, that was a big commitment. Now, people in our congregation have brought their parents back home to care for them, mothers and fathers, or you allow a sister to stay for a while with you. Lots of you have allowed sons and daughters to move back home into your house with their families. So you've all had a taste, a small experience of this commitment that Ruth was making. You know, Frank and I joke that we intentionally downsized when we moved here to Davidsonville so that none of our children would want to come home to live with us. Ruth's decision was extraordinary. She left the familiarity of her own country and her customs to immigrate to a foreign land in order to support her mother-in-law. Ruth knew that her chances of remarrying were slim, but Naomi's were nil. Naomi could have easily ended up penniless and alone, but together at least she'd have the company of a daughter-in-law. But there's another layer to Ruth's courage that we in the 21st century miss. Ruth was a Moabite. Her race and her culture were not only different, they were despised. In the decades past, the Moabites had refused the Israelites' passage through their land during that exodus from Egypt. And so laws became written into Deuteronomy that forbade the marriage between the people of Judah and the people of Moabite. If one did marry into the family, they and the next 10 generations of offspring were forbidden from entering the tabernacle. So even knowing how much hate and prejudice she might face, she chose to support Naomi, and somehow, I'm not sure how, but her heart shifted from self-preservation to unconditional love and loyalty. From a viewpoint of me to a viewpoint of you. A shift from me to you. I think that we're born selfish, or at least self-centered. Like, think about a baby. It cries to be picked up, to be nurtured, or just to be held and comforted. A teenager worries about her looks. An adult obsesses over his career. Only as the Spirit moves within us do we begin to mature in our faith and gain the strength of putting others first. And yet the Spirit does move, and God does expect us to grow and to mature. The great commandment is to love God and your neighbor, others. The 10 Commandments, the Lord's Prayer, the fruit of the Spirit, all speak about loving others. It has been said that the best and final test of a religion is how it affects our relationships with other people. Our love for God is displayed through the compassion that we show others. 1 John verse 4, "No one has seen God, but if we love each other, God lives in us, and his love is truly in our hearts." So if you want to know how much you love God, look at how you give and care for others. How do you give to the least of these, to the poor, to the unemployed, to victims of tragedy? Or how do you give to the citizens of a country with whom you're at war? I once had a mentor challenge me. We had been talking about our experience of serving at Lighthouse Shelter, and it had been warm. We connected to the people there. And she asked me, though, how could I truly help or be willing to help those who, through their own foolishness, had become homeless? How do we care for those who don't deserve our care? That's a measure of how much we love God. Another measure would be how well do you forgive? How much energy do you spend on those who are most unlike you? Dunuff and Drury, authors of Soul Shift, one of the books that inspired this series, suggest that when our souls make this kind of shift from me to you, that our questions begin to change too. For example, the question, what do I do with my life, becomes, where can I best serve others? Instead of, do I think this project is good enough that I will donate some of my money to? We ask, does someone need this money more than me? And would it help them or hurt them if I gave it to them? Even our prayer life changes from, dear God, this is me, this is my problem, to, dear God, there's someone else I would like you to help. Think about what you do in your everyday life. A lot of us dine out. Do you give a tip to your wait staff based solely on his or her responsiveness at that one meal? Or do you stop and consider that they probably make way less than minimum wage, whether they work in a greasy spoon or a fancy restaurant? And that economical breakfast that you just had isn't going to come to a very big tip. Even at 20%, it might be $3. You have a chance to bless people who are on the low income scale by just being generous with your tips. Also, who in our community is struggling because of the government shutdown? And how can we help them? We begin our lives looking out for ourselves. And then the Spirit matures us, and we become aware of and begin to care for others. Our souls go through a shift. I've talked a lot about soul this and soul that, and we weren't here last week to all get on board with the definitions. And so you might be thinking that when I'm talking about growing and maturing and aligning God's love, it sounds like I'm saying you've got to take the person you are and shove it into a Christian mold. But that is not what I mean. What I really want is for you to take some time to really connect with and know your own soul. Kirk Byron Jones, the author of the other book that inspired this series, suggests that our souls may be more of a mystery to us than a reality. But if you just smile for no particular reason, or you suddenly know something for sure without setting out to learn about it, or you get that feeling of peace even among a broken time, that's your soul showing itself. Your soul is your reservoir of limitless wisdom and peace and joy. It is your best guide for setting priorities and living at a sustainable pace. Your soul is the part of God. Your soul is the part that God last held before he released you into the freedom of this world. Jones describes the soul as the Godmost part of you that is never known and will never know fear. He says your soul is God's everlasting laughter. I like that one. God's everlasting laughter. Your soul is God's spirit in your spirit. And it's filled to overflowing with lavish love and grace and outrageous joy. And more than anything else, your soul wants you to know how much you are madly adored and loved by God in the grand hope that you will live from acceptance and not for acceptance. He says that our souls have three basic needs: authenticity, freedom, and transformation. Authenticity is exploring exploring and enjoying who you are at your deepest core. But freedom he describes as the ability to live in this world nimbly and yet maintaining a partnership with that divine flow. And transformation comes, he says, by responding to a voice within that challenges you to grow and expand and shift slowly over time. Now, I suggested earlier that we were born selfish or self-centered. But also from the day we were born, God has working with us in our souls. Rabbi Naomi Levi writes, your soul wants to teach you about your own strength. It wants you to believe that your gifts and your abilities are worthy. Your soul wants you to be able to journey through darkness or a fog or confusion. Your soul, that innermost God part of you, will lead you to great heights and to love and to kindness. Joan writes, your soul connects you to your source. And that sacred rootedness inspires a clear vision about who you really are and what you really want. A sense of godness and sureness of direction gives rise to confident peace, empowering us to stand up and act. When we last left Ruth, she was freely declaring to Naomi, with sureness and confidence and peace, where you go, I will go. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. The two widows crossed the border, the young, selfless one serving the old, embittered one. But blessing after blessing flowed from Ruth's selflessness. Naomi was able to find contentment again, and Ruth, the impoverished immigrant widow whose selflessness turned that whole story around, married a wealthy businessman, and their great-grandson was David, and he became the king of her new country, Israel. Not all of our stories are going to resolve as neatly into a happy ending as Ruth and Naomi's. And when we're in the middle of an event, it's going to feel overwhelming. Within our souls, however, God's Spirit can guide us to a life that is whole and loving. Ruth lived from that center or connection. It allowed her to be selfless. It gave her the strength she needed to make bold decisions. My goal for the next few weeks of soul care is to help you connect to your soul and know also what mature discipleship looks like, so that working together, each of us can live from the core of God's acceptance and live our best and fullest life. But this week what I learned in particular from the readings of Scripture and those two books is that our path to caring for others grows from connecting and knowing our own souls. That shift from me to you comes through being connected to God's Spirit in our spirit. So I'm going to give you a tip that will help you begin each day open to the whispers of your soul. I suggest you begin each day with a morning brew. B-R-E-W. Be still. Receive God's love. Embrace yourself and welcome the day. Brew. Be still. Receive God's love. Embrace yourself and welcome the day. Beginning with this brew will help you live from God's love and acceptance. Amen.